Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at the Boolean operators, and we're just going to jump straight into the code. And this is all based, of course, on the previous video on the lecture. As a reminder, let's look at how OR is defined in Python. So it basically works this way. If x is truthy, well, if x is true in a regular OR operation, if x is true, then the result of true or anything is going to be true. So the way it works in Python is that if x is truthy, it just returns x. It doesn't return true, it returns x, right? X has a truth value, so it returns it. However, and if you look at a regular OR operation, if you have false or something else, then the result is really going to be whatever that something else is. And in this case, therefore, if x is not truthy, so otherwise, it evaluates y and returns it. Okay, so that's how x or y works. So we can see that in action. Let's take x to be truthy first. So we can take, let's say, a string, right? So we can say string or, and I'll do something really weird, but we'll do that. String or this list. Now the string is truthy, so it's going to return the string. But if I were to do this, right, then the string is going to be falsy, right? It's an empty string, falsy. It has a length of 0. And so when that happens, it's actually going to evaluate and return y, which was the list 1, 2. Now, there's other things that this is useful for. For example, you might have 0 or, well, let's do 1 or 1 divided by 0. And what I want to illustrate with this point is that this side doesn't get evaluated if x is truthy. If this operand, if the left operand is true, it has a true value, a true truth value, then it will not even evaluate this side, and so it returns 1. But if we were to do 0 or 1 divided by 0, well, in this case, x is false, so therefore it will evaluate the right-hand side and return it, and of course, that's going to cause a problem. We have a division by 0 error, okay? So this allows us to sometimes get rid of problems like that. But the point here, the real point I want to make is that it is short-circuiting, right? For precisely the reason we saw there. Now, there are some uses also to using the OR operator beyond just Boolean expressions and if statements. We can use it for things like, for example, default values for variables. Let's say that we have a set of strings, s equals none. Okay, so that's not a string, that's a non-object, but we have this variable s1 that we typically would expect to have a string in, but maybe it's coming from a database, so it could be null, which would be none. It could be just the empty string, right? Or it could actually contain some contents, okay? So we have these 3 strings, and what we want is we want to make sure that those 3 strings always contain a valid string, right? And an empty string is valid as far as we're concerned, but we certainly don't want none to be in there, right? We want to put something else. And maybe if the string is empty, we want to put something else as well. So we might do something like this, s1 equals s1, or maybe we just say not available. And then we'll do the same thing with s2. We'll say s2 is equal to s2 or not available. And we'll do the same thing with s3 equals s3 or not available. Okay, so now we have S1, S2, and S3, and let's see what they are. Right? Well, as you can see, S1 is now NA. Well, yeah, because this was none, right? So that was falsy, so it returned Y. S2 was the empty string, so it's also falsy, so it returned the right operand, the Y. And S3, however, contained characters, so that was truthy, so it just returned itself. And so we have ABC. So that's one way of basically assigning default values. And you can do this with anything, right? You can do this with the, let's say that you're dealing with lists and you don't want to have an empty list, right? You want to have a list that contains at least one element and maybe it has to default to 0. Who knows what the use case is? But there you go. You won't end up with an empty list. Same thing will work with if you have none or that, right? So it works the same way. So this is a great way just to get default values. All right, next thing is to look at the AND. X and Y. How is that calculated? Well, if you think back to the truth table for AND, if we take x and y, and x is false, then false and anything is still false. So false and false is false, false and true is also false. So if x is false, we don't need to even consider y. We can just return false right away. So if x is falsy, return x, right? Because it doesn't matter what y is. But otherwise, what do we need to do? Well, otherwise, everything is now dependent on y, right? So if we have x is true, and the result of true and false is going to be false, and the result of true and true is going to be true. In other words, it's only dependent on y. So otherwise, we're going to evaluate and return y, okay? So that's the definition of x and y and how it works in Python. It doesn't return the Booleans, it returns the objects based on their truth values. Same thing as with OR. So for example, let's say we take a false and something else. So a false might be none. So maybe we take none and 0. Well, not 0 because that's also falsy. I want to do something that's not falsy. Okay. And let's print it since that's not going to show us. But it's the none, right? It returned none. It returned x because x was falsy. And it would work the same way if you had, let's say, the empty list and, let's say, this list here, right? So this is different from the OR, right? This returns the first one when it's false. The OR returns the second one when the first one is false. So we have that. So that can actually be used as well in certain cases. I mean, for example, suppose that you have a calculation and you have a is equal to, let's say, 2, right? And then we have b is equal to maybe 4, okay? And we want to look at a divided by b, okay? And we have that, that's 0.5. But suppose now that b is going to be 0, right? Well, if we have that, we get a division by 0 error. And we don't want that. We want to say that, you know what, if b is 0, just return 0. Otherwise, return a divided by b. So that's what we want to do. We want to return a divided by b in general, but return 0 when b is 0. Okay? So we could do that using an if statement. We could say if b is equal to 0, return 0, else return a divided by b. Okay? And not return, sorry, we're not inside a function, so we'll just print it. Okay, so there we go. So it prints 0. Now, let me re-put in a equals 2, b equals 0. Okay, so that's what we get. Now let's make b equal to 4. Okay, so it's going to print 0.5. So this is doing what we want. We can certainly write it this way. But another way of writing it would be to say the following. Print, well, we're going to print what? We want to print 0 if b is 0. So we're going to say print b and a divided by b. And let me again put in a and b here, just so that we can see it in context. And so we print 0.5, right? b was 4. That is truthy. So it's going to evaluate and return a divided by b, which was 4. On the other hand, if b is 0, then we get 0. And so we avoided this division by 0 error by doing it this way. This was exactly equivalent to doing this. Okay? All right. So given that, let's take a look now at a slightly different variance on this. Let's say that we have a value that we're retrieving from a database, a string. So the same example that we had before. And actually, I'm just going to copy paste these 3 examples right here. Now we saw how to assign a default value, right, to each one of those. But now let's say it's not a default value that we want. We want to check, or we want to return the first character of the string, if that first character exists. Otherwise, we want to return something else, maybe an empty string, okay? So using this, you might say, well, all I need to do is just do S1 0, or S2 0, or S3 0, right? These are the 3 variants. But of course, that's going to cause a problem, because none, well, it doesn't have, it's not indexable. It doesn't have, elements, so that doesn't work. So, okay, let's take that out. And that still doesn't work. Well, why? This S2 is a string, but it doesn't have characters, So obviously it doesn't have a first element of index 0. So that doesn't work. And the last one, however, does work. But we'd like something that works in general, no matter what this variable s is going to be, whether it's none, empty string, or an actual string. So one way to go about it might be to say, well, let's take s1 and s1, 0. So remember, if s1 is truthy, what is it going to do? It's going to evaluate this side. If s1 is falsy, it's just going to return itself, right? So let's go ahead and print this, and we'll do that for all three. And you'll see that we're almost there. We almost have what we need. So let's run that. So you'll see that the first one returns none. The second one returns the empty string. We don't see it, but it's there. And then the third one returns the first character of A. So we're almost where we need to be. The only thing is that we don't want to return none in this case. We also want to return the empty string. So what we can do here is change this, and instead of just doing that, we're going to OR it. Remember how we got default values? Well, we're going to OR it with the empty string. So if this evaluates to none, that will be falsy, and so we'll default it to this by using OR. And of course, it actually works exactly the same way in all three cases. So the second one is obvious because s2 is the empty string, it's falsy, so it returns a falsy thing here, which means that it's going to go ahead and then choose to return this empty string over here. S3 will actually work exactly as we expect, because S3 is truthy. So this expression here actually returns S30, which is a single character, which is also truthy. So the OR is going to return the left operand. It's going to return that first character. So now if we run this, we get exactly what we expect. Empty string, and A. Now, of course, what's interesting is that this doesn't just work with the empty string for the default value. You can do whatever you want, right? You might do something like that, in which case you'll get NA, NA, and A, right? So it kind of works with any default value here. So the last thing that we need to look at is the NOT operator. Now, the NOT operator isn't part of the Boolean class. In fact, if we look at help on the bool class, we'll see that we see like AND, right? We'll see OR, and we'll even see the XOR in here. But one thing that's notably missing is the NOT operator. And the NOT operator doesn't work quite the same way as AND and OR. Remember that AND and OR will actually return the objects that are the operands. It will return one of the objects depending on whether they're falsy or not, or truthy or not, depending on which operator it is. But NOT doesn't work this way. Now, the NOT with regular Booleans is pretty straightforward. Just negates true, it becomes false, and not false becomes true. And these are true Booleans. Now, the same thing works with objects. Now, objects have a truth value, so it will work kind of the same way. If we look at bool, let's say, of a string that contains characters, then that truth value is true. ABC is truthy. If we look at bool of the empty string, well, we get false because that's falsy. So if we do this, we can do not bool ABC. Well, not bool of ABC is going to return false, and not bool of the empty string will return true. But we don't have to put bool in here. We can just take it out. So we can just say not ABC, and Python will go in and actually apply the bool and look at the truth value of ABC, and it will then do a not of that truth value and return the Boolean. So when we do not ABC, we get false. And in fact, if we look at the type, just to be sure, we see that the type is indeed a bool. So it's returning a bool. Same thing with none. Bool of none is false, so we can say not none, and we'll get true. So that's all it does. It really looks at the truth value of the operand and then returns not of that truth value. So in this case, we always get a Boolean value back. All right, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.